British coffee shop chains have been feeling the grind of Brexit since the 2016 referendum. Although sales were up 4% last year, growth has more than halved. And even with the UK legally leaving the EU, the uncertainty doesn't stop there. The two sides will have to hammer out a new trading relationship, something that worries the industry.
This month we met with 50 business leaders, really to feel the pulse of the industry, to work out what the critical issues are at the moment. And one of the key questions was, what's the impact of Brexit? It was overwhelming that 49 out of 50 of those executives basically said the uncertainty has not been removed. If nothing else, there's still a lot of uncertainty to come.
A weaker pound has made coffee more expensive in Britain as it's traded in dollars. If the pound falls further post-Brexit, the ripple effect may lead to even higher prices. And with just 11 months to nail down a new trade deal, there's still the possibility of a hard exit. If that happens, the UK would be bound by World Trade Organization rules, meaning tariffs on roasted beans would be set at 7.5%, while tariffs on instant coffee would be 9%. Players in the UK's coffee industry are worried about rising operating costs. These machines, for example, are imported from Italy and are likely to become more expensive. But the impact that Brexit will have on staffing is perhaps the biggest concern for these coffee shops.
We don't know what the visa rules might be for future Europeans coming to Europe, nor do we really know what the visa rules will be for the 100,000 plus workers here working hospitality in the UK. Currently, the coffee industry doesn't know at this point. That's a lot of uncertainty for a lot of businesses.
And it's not just the coffee industry that needs to prepare for what comes after the transition.
I've yet to find a business that isn't affected by Brexit in some way. And I think the really important thing here is to remember that Brexit impacts the trading environment for any business that trades in, with or through the UK, goods or services, and also even if you're part of a supply chain, part of an ecosystem that is affected by Brexit. So my advice to business would be, work out how you're impacted, what do you know today, and start making those changes so that everything doesn't stack up at the end of the 11 months.
The government is adamant it will not extend the transition period beyond the end of December. So British businesses need to be prepared as the country closes the door on its former relationship with the EU and enters a new era. Natalie Powell, TRT World, London.
Well, let's get more now with Vicky Price, a board member at the UK Centre for Economics and Business Research. We also have Patrick Minford, Professor of Economics at Cardiff University and a former advisor to former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Welcome back to the program to you both. Patrick, if I could start with you, you've always been quietly confident that Brexit in the end would prevail, even when it looked like a withdrawal agreement would never be approved by the UK Parliament. How are you feeling now?
Well, I'm very glad that it's happened because although I was reasonably confident, there was a big resistance by the people that lost the referendum to the whole business, and a great effort was made to reverse it and produce a second referendum and all that sort of thing, which ultimately, of course, failed as a result of the election. So I'm very pleased that it's gone ahead, and it's what the British people want, of course, which is the main thing. People lose sight of the fact this was a very important and major democratic decision, which can't be really ignored. Even if you don't like it, you really have to accept what's decided by a democracy.
Now, Vicky, we heard there in Natalie's story some nervousness by some businesses over what Brexit might do to them. In our previous conversations, you've also expressed concerns at the potential impact on the UK economy as a result of Brexit. Are you still worried?
Oh yes, like businesses are worried all across the country in the sense that they haven't got a very clear path ahead. And of course, as Patrick is saying, we have to accept it, it's happening. But businesses have not been listened to in the past. Certainly in the 3 years since the referendum, they made a number of attempts to explain the difficulties that they would have if particularly we were going to be ending up with a hard Brexit, but also particular sectors such as the car industry, and others have expressed a lot of concern about the ability still after Brexit to have frictionless trade across with the EU, particularly given the strength of supply chains that exist. It's not clear at present, although businesses have been told to prepare, what they should be preparing for right now and what type of result we may have in 11 months' time, if that's indeed what we end up doing, in the sense of finally having negotiations approved and agreed and signed up to, and then leaving the transition period as well, which is meant to end in December 2020. Well, that creates still a lot of uncertainty. There has been a bit of a bounce back in confidence since the actual election in the middle of December. People had been more worried about having a left-wing Corbyn-led Labour government, and I think that certainly for business would have been a concern because there was talk of nationalisation and so on. But whether that is maintained while this uncertainty still remains, we just don't really know. And the forecast from the Bank of England that you mentioned earlier suggests very low growth in 2020, even though they are assuming that there will be an orderly exit at the end of 2020 and that there will be a proper and deep free trade agreement.
Patrick, an orderly exit from the EU in full is a big question mark right now. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said that she believes it's impossible for the UK and EU to seal a trade deal in that 11-month transition period. If she's right, do you believe Boris Johnson should swallow his pride and ask for an extension?
If you're asking
me,
no,
I don't.
Then yes.
Sorry, I don't.
I'm sorry,
right.
That was for Patrick, Vicky. Just.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Well, I'm happy to let Vicky answer it if she likes, but the truth is that no, I think that this is a hard deadline because we want to get on with our future, and we want to also finalize trade agreements with other countries, major countries like the US and Canada and Australia, New Zealand, and a whole bunch of others. Japan, the list is long. And so we don't want to be delayed in all that, which is why he set this deadline. And he also, I think, is trying to signal to the EU that they shouldn't play games anymore. They tried to play these games with all the people who wanted a second referendum, you know, to try to derail Brexit. And that failed. And it's time they now realize that this is actually now a deal that they need to strike, because if they don't strike it, they will face tariffs from the UK, which will be very devastating to a lot of their industries at a time when the EU itself faces the possibility of recession and quite a difficult situation, particularly because of the world economic background and the particular problems of the EU with a very shaky banking system. So the last thing it really wants is the sort of WTO rules situation at the end of 11 months. So I'm pretty confident that once there is serious negotiation, they'll go ahead and we'll have a business-like deal, which will allow us to strike these free trade deals around the world, which business doesn't particularly like because it means more competition for them, but that's good for the consumer and it's good for the economy, and business will just have to get used to this prospect. And they'll also have, I think, pretty close approximation to frictionless trade with the EU, because the EU needs, you know, a frictionless border. It's got to have it through WTO rules, and it wants zero tariffs and mutual recognition of standards for its own interests. So I think we'll get that.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but Vicky Price and Patrick Minford, thank you so much for your analysis on this momentous day.